way, I don't know, the package. Governor is on his way over here. So could I please get you all to reassemble? You're having way too much fun. And let's get everybody more or less assembled here. This may take a few minutes. All right, thanks everybody. One of the conversations that I was a part of during the break here related back again to this issue of finance, which admittedly I put on the table because it's so critical to everything else that we're doing. And the person I was talking with mentioned the question of offsets and credits of various kinds, which is a term that we throw around a lot loosely. And so maybe just in the interests of kind of giving everybody kind of a level playing field to work from, because we do talk a lot about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and rightly so. That fund represents a very small fraction of the value of the allowances that have been created and are being used to operate California's cap and trade program. The cap and trade program itself is only a fraction of our overall climate program. It's less than 20% of the emissions reductions for 2020 is coming out of that program. And from that program, the allowances that are auctioned and the revenue of which is put into a fund that the state appropriates is also less than 20% of the total value. So even if you're just thinking about cash that the state could invest in these kinds of programs, this is not a program that was created to raise revenue. Revenue is a side effect of the program, which was designed to reduce carbon. So if we are talking about raising revenues to do important and fundamental things that we need to do to store carbon, to carbon-proof our state, to make it more resilient and able to deal with climate change, we are going to have to look for new ways to get the funding to do that. And most of that is going to have to be from the private sector. There's no possible way, even if we wanted to, that government could be the source for all of that funding. And to me, this is an important bridge to the conversation that's going on and will be going on in Paris in December that the governor will be speaking at, because without having a global agreement in place that sends a strong enough signal to the capital markets, we're never going to get the kinds of investments that we need. At the same time, we know that worldwide there's capital out there looking for things to do. So we have to be able to make sure that those who have it understand that there's opportunities that can come from taking the kind of actions that we need to take. And with that introduction to the general topic, I would like to introduce the leading advocate for California's and in many ways for the world's action on global climate change, and that is the governor of the state of California, Jerry Brown. So Governor Brown, would you please?
Thank you, Mary, and everyone else that's here working on this very important topic of reducing the heat-trapping gases that are causing the radical change and disruption in the climate patterns that have been the basis for human life and activity and even our civilization itself. I come today because this is a topic that's not easy to grasp. It's complicated. The more you dig into controlling air pollution or measuring greenhouse gases or attempting to understand the models that examine and attempt to predict how world climate patterns will change over time. It definitely is a very complicated science that we mere lay people just get little glimpses of. And the more I talk about it, the more I look at it, the more I realize that it is complicated. And because it is, it allows people who have bad motives or soft minds to then raise doubts that are not based on science or facts, but are able to be communicated without people, reacting with total ridicule, because there's enough complexity and it takes enough knowledge that it's hard to be in this conversation at any level of depth. But we do know that the major scientific academies of the leading nations of the world all have made their findings, have engaged in research, and have clearly stated that human beings and the industrial activity of our modern lives is affecting climate by building up heat-trapping gases, and that the effects over time will be catastrophic. And when and how all that unfolds is something that cannot be said on a precise date. But we know with a high degree of confidence that we're facing an existential threat to our well-being and the well-being of the generations that come afterwards. Now, when I say that, I recognize in the day-to-day world of politics and business and life, these matters of meteorology and climate are rather remote, and they're not that accessible. And if you look at the surveys, if you ask people, what about climate change, it's not something that's going to pop up as something like crime in the neighborhood or losing your job or some forest fires or drought or whatever. But I think it is well to think about how do we deal with this issue? And I'm here this morning because I understand this is not something that is solved with a glib response, a speech, a couple of meetings, or a few regulations. What we're looking at is making a shift in the way life shows up. We are who we are because of oil, coal, and natural gas. Fossil fuels is what makes it. And I would assume that most of the people here are here because of fossil fuel got you here, clothed you, medicated you, or in whatever way you're functioning as a modern person, you are dependent on fossil fuel. So when we say we're going to reduce 10%, 20%, 40%, we are setting forth a huge challenge that is very easy to state, but anybody who has any understanding of what is implied by what is being called for realizes this cannot be done lightly or without a mobilization globally that we have never seen before outside of time of war. I thought a few comments would be in order from the governor of the Bank of England. That's Mark Carney. And if you take the Financial Times, you can get that from a couple days ago. He talked about climate change and stranded assets. And he made reference to the scientific understanding that between 20% and a third of the world's proven resources of oil, gas, and coal cannot be used, cannot be burned, have to stay in the ground. And that then raises a huge financial issue. And here is what he said about the financial system, which is true about the climate system. He said, once climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability, it may already be too late. I'll say that again. Well, I'll read the whole sentence. He said, "The challenges currently posed by climate change pale in significance compared with what might come. Once climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability, it may already be too late." In other words, once it becomes conventional wisdom, once we get it, that climate change is going to be catastrophic, and that becomes clear, and vast majorities of people at all levels in society agree with that, it may be too late because we were too far down the road. And what he's saying is that the oil companies and the natural gas companies and the coal companies, if they haven't made the plans and they haven't set in motion the moves that they can take, that their financial stability will be completely undermined. And if the oil and gas companies are undermined, the financial system itself can be undermined. And that's why, as the governor of the Bank of England, he's warning. This was just a couple of days ago. Now, the next day, several oil companies raised their objection and said he's not being helpful. But I bring it up because it's one of the most authoritative responses about how big and real this is. And I know here we're talking about a technical scoping plan, what's in it, what's not in it. But we have to be able to go from the big picture to the operational steps of how we react. And what Mark Carney of the Bank of England is saying is that the banks and the oil companies are not getting it. They're not really acknowledging where they are. And by the time it becomes crystal clear, it'll be too late. And then the impact when people face the stark reality that a huge percentage of the 80% to 60% have to stay in the ground, that is devastating financially. And what's going to happen to the oil companies, because they're so big and important and pervasive, will affect our whole financial system. So that is probably the most concrete warning that I've heard from a mainstream, credible person, not in the environmental movement, that's telling us we can't wait till everybody gets it. We have to start now. And California is one of the most important places in the whole world where steps are being taken. And they're being taken based on clarity, science, engineering, and regulatory sophistication. This is a problem that is subject to a lot of rhetorical commentary on all sides in many, many venues. But at the end of the day, what is crucial is that knowledgeable, skilled people in positions of power and responsibility take the steps needed to get where we want to go. Now, in California, we have a goal. I've set a goal of 40% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than we had in 1990. Today, the estimate in 2013, is that California, the emissions were 460 million tons of CO2. By 2020, we want to get down to 431 million tons, and by 2030, we want to get to 260 million tons. To go from 460 where we are to 260, that takes heroic effort, scientific breakthroughs, massive investments, a lot of cooperation, and a political understanding that does not exist today. So this is not stuff for amateurs. This is quite challenging. And our Air Resources Board, which I like to always note, was signed into law by Ronald Reagan when he was governor of California in response to the problems of California air pollution. And already those many decades, the Air Resources Board has developed the scientific and technical capacity to deal with this problem. And it is a political problem, but it's also fundamentally a technical problem. And it's going to require a lot of breakthrough, a lot of research, and billions, tens of billions of dollars invested by many, many different sources. So here we are. we've got to, and it's not just one thing. Oh, if we could just stop one thing. You know, I won't even list what they are, but you probably might know, because there are a lot of activist groups that are focused on, we'll stop that, or we might stop that. It doesn't work that way. We have to find cleaner fuels, much cleaner fuels. That's why we have a low carbon fuel standard. We have to find more efficient vehicles, and vehicles that use less fuel and use no fossil fuel, like electric cars and hydrogen cars. We have to drive fewer vehicle miles. The latest report that we have is that Californians drive over 330 billion miles a year. There are 32 million vehicles of various kinds moving around, mostly almost entirely fossil fuel. And there's a lot of activity here. Everybody is part of that vehicle miles traveled. You could probably consult yourself on how many you're contributing. And how do we do that? Well, we do that through land use policies, closer to where you work, telecommuting, lots of things, but not going to happen overnight. It's not like let's have a bill and tomorrow vehicle miles travel will go from 330 billion to 320 billion. It's quite a task. And the very success and prosperity that everybody enjoys is directly connected to the vehicle miles traveled, to the amount of fossil fuel burned. So squaring the circle, it's not quite squaring the circle, but almost as difficult. We're going to reduce and take fossil fuels out of our lives and out of the economy, and we're going to keep our prosperity and our ability to keep inventing and improving the quality of everybody's life. And not only here, but we're going to do it all over the world. And we're going to add a couple of billion people besides, and probably another billion cars. Now, how the hell we do that, probably nobody knows. But of the people who have the best understanding and the best capability to do things, right here in California, the California Air Resources Board, and this scoping session, which is, after all, to get us to 2030, and will take place over the next year and a half, is the concrete process whereby we deal with all these complicated issues, which we can't talk about. Because in my world of politics, this is almost, it's a dark reality that you just can't even talk about, because it's too obscure, too complicated. It's not high in the polls. Don't bother me now. But if that mood persists, we're going to be like the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, says, it'll be too late then, and there'll be real catastrophe. So we have to have the capacity. When I say we, you, myself, the legislature, people in positions of power in the financial and academic and business world, we have to have the ability to imagine what isn't. We have to see down the road, and that's very hard. People don't like to think that something horrible could happen. We all like our happy time news in the morning. But you got to see it, and then we have to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen. And that's what this scoping session is all about. It's about taking the steps to deal with the fuels, the investment in biofuels and efficiency, in appliances and buildings, and across the whole range of how our modern civilization works within the limited reach of what the Air Resources Board has competence and legal authority to do, which is quite a lot. And if you compare it to what other states and other places are doing, there are a few places, maybe none, that have the sophistication and the capability and now the political will to proceed down the path that I'm suggesting. And I didn't even mention the storage of carbon in forests and wetlands. This is a whole life project. And this scoping session, while rather mundane and not the subject matter for gubernatorial visitation or journalistic inquiry, still is a very, very profoundly important undertaking. And I wish you well, and I want you to know that everything that can be done will be done. And California will do what it has to do, and in so doing, others will join us. I've met in the last 2 weeks with the President of China, the Prime Minister of India. I've talked to the President of the United States. I've met with the President of Hungary, the President of Chile, President of Norway. I can tell you people know about California, people are watching what's going on, and there's a lot of goodwill to get us to the goal. Of course, it's going to take a lot more than goodwill. It's going to take billions, trillions of dollars, and it's going to take commitment all over the world, even in the face that everything is important, that everything is on your front page, has nothing to do with this scoping session. Even though the scoping session is more important than 95% of the news that you can read today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Governor. I think if that didn't get you raring to go, I don't know what it would take, actually. You can see why I get up raring to work every morning. Okay, it really is time for a lunch break now. When is 1:15? We will be back, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.